Burnout in school leadership isn't just about workload. It's about leading without alignment. Today, my guest is Michelle Sloan of Sloan Leadership Solutions, and we're diving into her new book, Purpose-Driven Principle. You will not want to miss this episode. But first, I have a brief message from our sponsor. I want to thank our legacy partner, Craig Williams, founder of Conversary. At Spark Hope, we believe story matters because story shapes how we lead, how we connect, and how we show up in the world. Conversary helps authors and leaders bring clarity to their story and confidence to their voice so that their brand truly reflects who they are. You can learn more about their work by visiting the link in today's show notes or on the Spark Hope website. Thank you, Conversary, for supporting the Lead with Hope podcast. Welcome to the Lead with Hope podcast, where we explore the power of hope in life and leadership. Michelle Sloan is an educational consultant with over 25 years of experience as an elementary educator and principal. As the founder of Sloan Leadership Solutions, she coaches and mentors school leaders across the globe. She helps them develop strategic plans and get back on track towards excellence. Michelle is dedicated to helping leaders discover their purpose to create a transformational impact. And today, I am excited to welcome my friend, Michelle Sloan, to the podcast.
Hi, Brandy. Excited to be here.
Well, this first question is always one of my favorites. And of course, I know your story, but for the listeners, why don't you start off by just telling us a little bit more about who you are?
So my story is it took a lot of twists and turns in the beginning. So I actually went to school for marketing. And right after I graduated, I was a manager and a buyer for a large retail organization. And I did that until I had two boys. And after my boys were born, I decided to homeschool for a couple of years. So I taught them both how to read, and I just fell in love with teaching. And I saw where if you could teach someone how to read and fall in love with learning, that they could do anything in life and they could feel like they could do anything in life. So I went back to school, became an elementary teacher. I did that for 7 years and then went back to school for educational leadership and administration, and then became an elementary and middle school principal. I did that for 12 years. So that's kind of my journey through education.
Something that I just learned about you, Michelle. I didn't know you homeschooled your boys for a time.
Yeah, I did. 6 years. So,
yeah.
But they were a span of 3 years. So really only both of them through first grade.
And then when you were in elementary education, what grades did you teach?
I did kindergarten 1 year and then first through fifth. I think my favorite was second grade. I loved second grade. If I had to pick a grade to go back to teaching, that would be it.
I was an elementary principal pre-K through 1. I had just under 400 students under the age of 7. Michelle, when I took that job, I really thought I'd hit the jackpot and I had, found utopia in education. Wow.
Well, but they're so sweet.
They are so
little, and they love you.
So
their hugs are great.
I would get a hug every single day. I could count on that. But what I didn't know whenever I would get those hugs is what was going to come with it. What bodily fluids was going to come.
That's so true.
But my favorite was middle school. And it was a surprise to me because whenever I started, I thought I would really enjoy working with high school kids. As a school social worker, I love that counseling piece, but I fell in love with working with middle school kids. And after I served as that elementary principal, I went back to middle school, and a lot of similarities between the littles and the middle school, but I just love the fact that those middle schoolers are kind of at a fork in the road. They're trying to figure out who they are and what they're going to do with their life. And that purpose piece comes into play whenever you're talking to middle schoolers and they're dreaming about their futures. But as you reflect on your journey, I'm curious, what drew you to that concept of the purpose-driven principle?
Yeah, I think for the realization when I was walking through so many different challenges in both life and in school and in school leadership, trying to determine, who I am as a leader and second guessing every decision that I'm making and failing to please the students, the parents, the staff, the community, the district, failing to meet everybody's needs. I got to, like you said, a fork in the road, and I had to determine, what am I going to be as a leader? Who am I going to be as a leader? And then what is my mission? And really dial in on the school that I was in and be intentional about creating something unique and different, because every initiative, every idea, I felt like I was listening to one teacher's needs and what they needed to be supported, and then a parent and what their student needs, and then what the district was bringing down. I really felt like some of these things are just the new shiny thing that's coming down and everybody wants to try it. We don't need one more thing on our plate. I got to that place where I decided I'm not going to try to do everything for everybody. And it's really about purpose, knowing who I am, what I'm gifted at, what I'm not gifted at, what are my strengths, what brings me joy, what do I find passionate and purposeful, and then also doing the same thing for the members of my team.
And you've written a book called The Purpose Driven Principal, and we're going to come back to that. I want to hear more about your book because it is still relatively new. But when you think about your purpose and your mission and how you show up in that role as principal, talk to us about that idea of alignment. How do you find alignment, or how do you help principals find alignment for themselves?
And that's a great question. And you're right. There's so many different plates spinning in the air. And there's so many different initiatives and we're not short on information these
No.
days. And, we're looking at people's social media, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube. And so we're trying to figure out what the best possible solution is to any given problem all day long. But when you don't know who you are and you don't know why you exist, what purpose you serve, and that kind of applies to your organization or your school as well. Every school exists to educate kids.
Right.
Like that is just something that we all do. But what that looks like is different. And so you have to figure out what is unique about your school or your organization, what sets you apart, what makes you different, why do you do what you do? Then you can truly align and make those decisions align with who you are, because one school in California can be killing the next platform or program that supports students, and it's very different from a rural small community school in North Carolina. And we're all educating students, and so there is that component, but the true mission comes in knowing your demographic, knowing your population, knowing your students, knowing your community, what those goals are, identifying those, and then really building your vision out for that community.
And I do think that your values and, as you shared earlier, your strengths, they have to align with what that school needs, with what the people in that school needs. And then as a leader, one of our biggest responsibilities is fostering belief. We have to foster belief that we can educate students, whatever those demographics are, whatever those problems are. And we have to build the systems to support that belief and that hope that tomorrow is going to be better.
For sure. And I think that when you talk about core values, those are what drive and how you behave, what drive your decision making, how you behave in those meetings and how you interact with one another. And so you have to define, how you're going to behave in those school environments and on team meetings and in the community. And really, that becomes who you are. And when you know who you are, then you can help the teachers know who they are and what role they serve in the classroom. And then they can help the students know. One of the things that you talk about, the belief statements, and that every child can learn and really having to believe that. We talked about going back to the purpose. We had a statement, everyone's created on purpose and for a purpose. And we just kept saying that over and over in our, our family meetings, our staff meetings. Everyone's created on purpose and for purpose. And it just took on it at the last school where I was principal, it took on a different movement. And I don't know how it started, but then I started announcing for on the intercom for the student birthdays, happy birthday, so and so. You were created on purpose and for a purpose. You have gifts and talents that only you have that the world needs. We're so glad you're here and you can use those. And then it was printed on birthday cards, and then it was printed on sides, and then the students had shirts made that said, I was created on purpose and for a purpose. And it really, it took on a life. It became, I would hear the students saying in the hallway, happy birthday, Mrs., to their teacher, you created on purpose and for a purpose. But I really wanted them to know that because it hurt my heart when I would hear students say, I am not good at anything. I can't do anything. And so I told the teachers, like, it might not be academics. Their strength might not be academics. And so how are we going to celebrate and recognize the wins of other gifts and abilities? And so we talked about, character. A lot of schools will do the character and recognize that. If you're going to have core values in your school, then you should be celebrating those core values and looking at who's modeling those. And as a principal, you can do the very same thing for your staff. So we have a great opportunity to make a difference in a lot of people's lives as a principal.
And a lot of those things it's just kind of what we do as leaders. But what's happening there is you're building systems and you're embedding that hope and that belief in those systems so that your students can become the best version of who they are. And we can't do that for our students if we're not doing that for the adults in the building too. It kind of goes hand in hand. And I love those mantras and those little things that you do every single day as a principal. But something that I recognized in my time, mostly as a superintendent, was a lot of things are happening in schools, but we're not writing them down. We're not being intentional about it and writing it down and being purposeful in how we onboard new people, how we train people, and making this consistent throughout the organization. And so when you think about that, either in your time as a school leader or your time as a coach now, what are some very specific intentional things that you would encourage principals to do to embed this belief and this purpose into their systems?
If we're just talking specifically about systems and processes, you hit it with the hammer and the nail. It's writing things down. And I remember when I first, think 3 years into being a principal, my admin assistant was going to go on maternity leave. We all know the secretary really runs the school. And so I had that moment of, okay, I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to do that. I need to get into her brain. And so that out of that developed what we called the brain system, and I have since replicated it and helped other schools replicate it. But literally every person on the admin team has a brain binder. And it's probably, we called it the brain binder, but it's similar to a substitute binder, right? When you have your substitute, you have your teachers create a substitute folder where they are, they have a map of the class, a roster of the class. How do you take attendance? How do you do lunch orders? How do you, where everything is? And so I had every person on the admin team and the leadership team create one. And it's a living, breathing document because it just changes from year to year. But it is so freeing because you can pull out that binder at any point in time and see what's going on for that month. And then behind it is exactly how to do it from fundraising events to parent nights to conferences, inputting grades, everything. And so it was bring your brain to the meeting, is what we would say. It just became something that is repeatable. And if it's repeatable, then it just makes your life easier year after year.
You're building capacity because you're not the only one that can do these things. You
Yeah.
can share the brain binder with other people, you can delegate tasks, and the specifics of what needs to be done is cataloged. It's in there, and it can be delegated, and you're building capacity within your organization. And then the second thing is there's some accountability and ownership. So if these are the things that I have communicated, this is the expectation, or maybe the leadership team communicates those expectations, we can hold each other accountable, supportive accountability, so that we can all be the best version of who God created us to be.
Yeah, I love that because it really is everybody's
Yeah.
responsibility. And one of the things that for me was so hard as a first time principal was feeling like I had to be the one to be responsible for the culture and the problem solving and holding everybody accountable. When I recognize that this is a shared responsibility, that feedback goes both ways, it goes all different directions. And accountability to each other and culture is a responsibility for everybody. Yes, the leader gets to determine the direction and they get to set the tone and they need to model what they're expecting others to do, but it's everybody's responsibility.
Absolutely. And I love that you said that because vision definitely shapes culture. I believe vision and mission helps to shape our culture. Vision without systems isn't going to take us to where we want to go. Vision sets the direction, systems create the traction,
That's
and
good.
helps us to establish those processes and those structures so that we can optimize our culture, we can cultivate capacity, share the ownership and the
Yeah,
responsibility.
that's so good. His vision is without the action is just a dream, right? It's
Absolutely.
just a dream. That's so good.
Now, whenever I was a principal and a superintendent, I think back on my journey and I think about some of those difficult times. And we can't separate our lives and our leadership, they're all happening at the same time. The world changed after COVID. We expect respect, we give respect, but that all changed. And people are not as kind anymore. And those are some of the things that stand out to me post COVID.
Hmm.
Those were some of the hard times. For you, when you reflect on your journey, what are some of the hard times that have shaped who you've become?
Yeah, there's a couple of pivotal moments for me in the hard times. One is the COVID for sure. I had just moved to a new state and I was about 8 years into my being a principal. So I felt confident and then COVID happened. And so I'm in a new state at a new school without my support, without my team, and not even knowing if we're going to have school. It was June of 2020. I didn't know the state guidelines, state rules. Every state was kind of doing things differently at that time. And so looking back now, 4 years, I did that for 4 years. So we're 6 years into that, looking back and seeing how I had walked through that. I don't even know how I did it. I'm really just forever grateful for the team that rallied around and we championed those students and the families and really made synchronous and asynchronous learning happen. So that was one pivotal moment. I think anybody who was in education during COVID, we just need that badge, right? We need to wear that I survived teaching in 2020. Just the next pivotal moment, I think, was when I started a school from scratch in a partnership with my church. They wanted to launch a school. And so I was able to be the administrator for that and just start it from scratch and see past the mission, the vision, the core values, and really just build something from the very beginning. And it's been 14 years ago, and it's still going strong. I stay in touch with them. They're doing great. But it was hard work. It was really hard work. I learned a lot about myself. I learned a lot about education, and I learned how to build a team because I found out my limitations and my strengths. People, the best leaders know themselves well. They're self aware. We all hear about being self aware, but they're not afraid to acknowledge their weaknesses.
Yeah.
They're not afraid to acknowledge their limitations, and then they staff people accordingly. One of the biggest mistakes that I see leaders making is hiring somebody they love. They're just like them. We would make a dynamic duo. But really, you need to find somebody who is, their strengths are where you are weak. And that's how you build a strong school, by making sure that you have a diverse team and a diverse group. So, learned a lot about myself.
You and I have that in common. We recognize the importance of self awareness. And I know you talk about that in your book, and I talk about that in my book, Lead with Hope. And we're both working genius facilitators. I love the working genius because we all have 6 competencies. Some are our genius, some are our competencies, and some of our frustrations. And people today are burning out. They're overwhelmed. They're stressed because they're doing too much that is not one in their circle of control. A lot of times we get stuck because we're trying to fix things we can't fix. They're not in our circle of control. And then the second thing is we're operating in our working frustrations too frequently.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just, like you said, became certified in the 6 types of working genius, and I think it's going to make a difference for a lot of organizations and schools. And I recently just mapped out with a school and it helped them to recognize they have a gap. I have 2 gaps when they're working on a project. They're missing 2 very key components that they don't have anybody gifted in. And so, like you said, if we're working in an area that causes us frustration, we're going to burn out. And so many times we hire somebody to do one thing,
Mhm.
the next thing pops up. Who's going to do it? Somebody who's like, well, I'll take it on. And then a year or 2 later, they're gone.
Yeah.
And we have to start looking at, what brings people joy, what then using the gifts that they've been given. So,
Yeah. It's really about, you know, hiring people and then plugging them in to where they're gifted, to what their strengths are, to what lights them up and brings them joy. Not that we're going to be able to do things that bring us joy every moment of every day, but there should be some harmony there. There should be some balance there.
yeah, for sure. We all have to do things we don't like. You just don't want it to be 24/7.
Absolutely. Now, Michelle, from what you're seeing, where do you see principals feeling the most pressure or struggle right now? And how can purpose driven, hope fueled leadership help them navigate that?
I think principals, look, there's a lot of negative energy and negative talk in education right now. Teachers are leaving, principals are leaving. The principal turnover rate is actually higher than the teacher turnover rate right now. And I think the teacher turnover rate feeds into the pressure that principals are having. Like you said, a lot has changed since COVID. Principals are already exhausted having to go through those 3 hard years. I remember after the first year was finished, we're like, we survived. And then it's like year 2, another 14-day quarantine. It's like, oh, how are we going to do another year of this? And then things kind of let up after that. But boy, the kids were at different levels academically. We had to quickly figure out what we were going to do and how we were going to navigate 2 years loss of school. And so it's been a challenging, 3 to 5 years. And then I feel like they're just now starting to get their joy back. They're starting to get some normal routines and rhythms back in place, but a lot has shifted and changed, and you can only take so much change. So there are leaders that are finding joy in school. They keep learning and they keep growing. And those are the teachers or the principals that I see really being able to say no to some things. They don't have that open door policy. They have intentionally scheduled time in their day where their door is closed and they have focused work. It's really about building capacity for yourself and being comfortable owning it. We're so, as principals, we were so good at making sure that the teachers had their planning periods, they had their duty-free lunches, that their professional development was on their time.
Mhm.
We really tried to make sure that they had what they need to be successful. And we did that at the detriment of our own mental health and physical health. I know a lot. I say that for myself, but I know and hear it from a lot of other principals. And I think we're done. We feel like if I chose this career because I want to make a difference. And I want to watch kids come alive and fall in love with learning. And I want to support the teachers who are doing that hard work. I can't do it 24/7 and continue to work 60, 70 hours a week. We have to establish those boundaries. We have to know who we are. We have to get back to, what the purpose is, what the mission is, that solid foundation, and stick to that. And whenever you say yes to something, you're saying no to something else. So if I do that, what am I not going to do? Because our plates are already full.
Mhm.
So if you're asking me to do one more thing, what can I say no to then?
Absolutely.
What's
You can't just keep piling it on. Peter DeWitt wrote a book about de-implementation. I really love that term. If you're adding one thing, then just what you said, Michelle, then what are you taking off? Because you can't just keep adding things. But we're so conditioned in education, and it's only been since I have left the formal role of school leader that I have realized that in some ways we're somewhat institutionalized.
Hmm.
We have norms and we have expectations of the way things are done. And I think in order for people to thrive as teachers, as leaders, as educators, we've got to reimagine education and definitely consider how to be intentional, how to be purpose driven, and how to be hope fueled, fostering that belief that tomorrow can be better than today. Because the reality is today, teachers aren't going into educational administration. We don't have principals who want to be superintendents. The pools are shrinking, and we've got to be cognizant of that, and we've got to try to bring the joy back to the field because there is a lot of good there as well. Let's pause for just a moment because I want to tell you about a partner who truly aligns with the heart of this podcast, Conversary. Here on Lead with Hope, we talk a lot about clarity of purpose, clarity of voice, and clarity of direction. And that's exactly where Conversary comes in. They help leaders, educators, and change makers uncover the story behind their work and share it in a way that feels honest, meaningful, and deeply aligned with who they are. If you've ever felt the nudge to write a book, refine your message, or build a brand that actually reflects your values, not just your resume, Conversary doesn't rush you or box you in. They walk alongside you, helping you shape your story with intention and integrity. You can learn more by clicking their link in the show notes or visiting them through the Spark Hope website. A big thank you to Craig Williams at Conversary for being a legacy sponsor of this podcast and for investing in stories that matter. Because when we share our stories with clarity and hope, real change happens. So, Michelle, as you think about school leaders who are feeling stretched thin or uncertain of where to begin to get that joy back, what's a meaningful place that you would encourage them to start?
I would say go back to the foundation, go back to square one. I work with a lot of new principals, but I also have principals that have lost kind of their way. They want a hard reset. They want to get back to the basics. They feel like they've just been, treading water for a while and they just need a hard reset. And we always start at the foundation. They'll often reach out and say, "Can you coach me for 3 sessions on this one specific challenge that I'm having?"
Mhm.
And I'll say, "I can, but that's to me, a crack in the foundation unless we get back to building that solid foundation, which to me is your mission, who you are, why you exist, know your strengths, your weaknesses, your abilities and opportunities, know your school's strengths, weaknesses, what defines who your school is, what makes it unique and different from every other school down the street, casting that vision, defining those belief statements and the core values, that crack is going to appear somewhere else. It's a cycle. Without a solid foundation, those cracks are going to keep happening. So I'll help them through the 3 sessions of that challenge, but I will hear from them again until we get that solid foundation.
I so agree with that. There's so many tools that you and I can help them with. And then the other piece of that, Michelle, I talk about excellence and defining that. So when we're leading in a school or a district, how are we defining success and excellence? Because if we don't know, it's going to be hard for us to articulate those expectations to our people.
Yeah, and I think that those expected outcomes, that's a key piece that's missing when we roll out a new initiative or program or a curriculum or, something that we're expecting them. What does that look like? And then when we're doing our observations, we're looking for those, and then we use that data to bring it back and refine our professional development. And, things aren't connected. The evaluations aren't connected to anything specific. The curriculum is here, go do it. And then it's not, things just aren't connected. And that's what I found is just like there's a lot of great things out there that have been piecemealed together from, what professional development that we've been to, or a conference that we've been to, or a podcast that we listened to, or something we heard from a teacher in another district.
Yeah.
And it's just piecemeal together. And really, we have to unify everything and bring it back to be intentional about why we are who we are. We're not, you can't be everything to everybody. You can't please everybody. You have to know who you are. And as a leader, you don't want to make it difficult for people to follow you as a leader. So that's where those assessments come into place. But it's mutual, letting your team understand who you are as a leader, and then they helping them understand who they are and what their strengths are. It's about building community. It really is about relationships and building community. And when you bring that all together, schools can thrive.
Yeah, it's definitely possible. When I think about my principal preparation, I don't think we ever talked about self-awareness. Communication was maybe a little bit. There might have been a little bit of education on that. And then the other big one that I think all principals need training in is conflict management, conflict resolution. Unfortunately, I don't see that in our principal preparation programs. But thing that I would love to see districts do is when a new principal comes on, they get a coach. They get somebody who is their encourager, their supporter in their corner, not at all tied to evaluation, helping to bring the best out in them
Yeah.
and giving them on the job training to be successful. Because I don't know about you, but I didn't have it. I didn't have it until I was at the very end of my career as a principal. And then I carried that into the superintendency with me.
Yeah, it's so true. I would love to see it's twofold though, because most states are providing new principals for the first 3 years, some type of a mentor. They're calling them a mentor. And I think that's needed as well because there are systems and processes within the district that they need to understand. Very often, they are a seasoned principal who's walked through the training and they've been assigned a new principal in that district.
Yeah.
But what happens is they're also reaching out to me and you for coaching
Mhm.
as they don't feel safe and vulnerable in sharing some of the real struggles with that mentor that's in the district. They don't want to be seen like, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm struggling with these parents or a few teachers. And is that going to go get back to the district superintendent? And so they really need both. I
They
wish
do.
that they would build that into their budget to provide a district for processes and systems and understanding, specific programs that they need to roll out, evaluation systems, things like that, but then also giving them a coach that's a safe place to really walk through things like, how do I navigate this conflict that I'm having with these two? Because here's what I said and did, and I failed. And it's a safe place to share that.
That's how we learn. When we can really talk about our shortcomings, our setbacks, our failures, we need to be able to process that in a safe place where we can learn from our failures and cultivate that growth mindset. I mean, as a principal, that's what I wanted from my teachers. I wanted them to come to me and to share with me, and for it to feel safe, for it to be an area where they could grow and they could learn and they could become the best version of themselves. But unfortunately, you're right. They don't feel safe in doing that with the people in their organization. And that's one of the reasons why they come to us for coaching. I know the Illinois Principal Association has a wonderful mentoring and coaching program, but every year the struggle is the same. The funding is not there from the state budget. And so if you're listening to this podcast today, I think advocacy is a big important piece of this as well, advocating for mentoring for principals and coaching for principals through established programs like the Illinois Principals Association. But there are also a number of us out there that are coaching and supporting principals. So we can always advocate at the district level with our superintendents and our school boards to get that in the district budget.
Let's set our leaders up for success and use some of that. You
Yeah.
know, you mentioned earlier that you didn't have that support in the beginning. And I hear still, even to this day, that principals feel lonely and isolated. Some of the larger schools will have, counselors and MTSS coordinators and two or three assistant principals. And so that's a different case, but that's not the majority.
No.
And what happens is you're a teacher and you've got your tribe. You've got your teacher tribe, right? And you
Yep.
guys are figuring things out together and you're sitting in your circles and your PLCs and you have community. But when you become the building principal, there is nobody else like you in that building. And so, having that community is so important and mentally and emotionally for our leaders.
Yeah. And there's like 850 some districts in the state of Illinois where you and I are. And there's a lot of those school districts that are rural. They're small school districts where there's maybe one or two principals. And it can be very lonely and very isolating. But I would encourage people that are listening, if you're in that situation, there are a lot of groups, there's masterminds, there's coaching programs, there's a lot of ways that you can cultivate your own tribe and you can reach out to people nearby that are in a similar role as you and go out to lunch with them on a regular basis and find people that are able to support you and lift you up and you can do the same for them. That's really important.
Yeah, that's good.
So, Michelle, with your book, tell us a little bit about Purpose Driven Principle. When did it come out? Where is it available? What do the listeners need to know about your book?
Well, that Purpose Driven Principle book came out in November. It launched in November. It hit Amazon bestseller 4 days in a row. So I was excited
Congratulations.
about that. I snapped pictures and even saw where I was like two below Harry Wong's book. And so I thought, wow, that's mind boggling to me. But it really is about building the foundation of purpose
Mhm.
and defining that, and then the 4 pillars, which to me are people, pedagogy, processes, and professional development. And so we walk through those 4 pillars, aligning to purpose, and then we go through the system of designing and then aligning. So that's pretty much the cycle. And then the course of the book just filled with stories, practical ways to implement and be a purpose driven principal. It's also, I think the book is also at Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and a couple of other bookstores as well.
Awesome. Well, I will drop a link for the book in the show notes. And we've talked about a lot of things, purpose, hope. As we end our conversation, Michelle, what is giving you hope in the world right now?
The world, I find my hope in my faith, and my hope is in God. And I know that it really, for me, it can't be found in one person or one system.
Mhm.
As far as education goes, I am seeing a lot of joy filled educators eager to learn and grow and be the best that they can. And that's giving me hope. They're excited about being purpose driven and being intentional about owning their own leadership and developing that. And so that's giving me hope in education. And I love those leaders. It's like quiet the noise. There's so much negative out there. Let's bridge this gap and do the hard work. So
I love working with people who are ready to just roll up their sleeves and do the work, develop, become the best version of themselves, and step into their calling, who God created them to be. So that's a beautiful reason to have hope in the world. So for those people that want to get in touch with you, how would they connect with you, Michelle?
my website, sloanleadership.com, and maybe we can put in the show notes if they're interested in signing up for the Purpose Driven Principal newsletter. They can also do that at the website as well.
Absolutely. We will have that in the show notes. And Michelle, it is always a joy to talk with you. I'm glad we were able to do this today. And I look forward to watching you grow your business and see what you do in this world to add purpose and intention to all the leaders out there. So thank you for coming on the show today.
Thank you so much, Brandy.
That's a wrap for today's episode of Lead with Hope. Remember, the world needs your leadership, and change starts with you. Fuel your life with hope, embrace your purpose, and shine your light for others. If this episode inspired you, I'd be so grateful if you could take a moment to give us a 5-star rating and share it. Every review helps spread hope and empowers more leaders to rise. Thanks for listening, and until next time, keep leading with hope.